Today, we're gonna tell you stories all around Bayrischzell, Wendelstein, and the region Bayern. The first legend is called the Carved Little Man. At Riesenkopf, a neighbor of Wendelstein, there was once an alpine hut. After work, 3 lumberjacks sat together inside. They had already eaten their corn porridge, a maize porridge, and now lit their pipes. To kill their boredom, one of the lumberjacks took a piece of wood and started carving. It didn't take long before he had finished a little man. The other 2 men immediately set about making a garment for the little figure out of a couple of sackcloths. They then put this on the wooden man. Now, one of them noticed that there was still some corn porridge left in the porridge pan. He took his wooden spoon and scarfed the porridge together with it. That made a few spoonfuls, and as a joke, he rubbed them all over the mouth of his friend's carving. Then the little wooden man actually opened his mouth and started eating the porridge. The 3 woodcutters were so terribly frightened that they got goosebumps. In his fear, one of them grabbed the little man and threw him out the door. Because it was already time to go to bed, they hid in the hay. They didn't feel all that comfortable. Then the door burst open and the little wooden man slipped into the hayloft. He grew bigger and bigger until he was a gigantic guy. When he opened his mouth again, a dull voice came out of his throat. It said, "I'll find you the first one, I'll wind the second one, and I'll throw the third one over the roof of the mountain pasture." Then the horrible fellow pulled a woodcutter who had dug himself deep into the hay out by the collar and beat him to death with a terrible punch. Then he grabbed second one and put his arms around his neck until he fell, strangled onto the haystack. Then he dragged the third woodcutter out the door and hurled him over the roof of the hut. He lay dead in front of the mountain pasture with his limbs shattered. The Mordau. On the way between Reuteralpe and the Watzmann, which is covered in eternal snow, there is an alpine pasture called Mordau. A long time ago, a beautiful dairymaid lived there who had a sweetheart who was very fond of her. However, she soon grew tired of him because a handsome hunter had pushed the poor shepherd out of the girl's heart. The boy was very upset about this and was no longer happy with his life. But the dairymaid was afraid that the 2 rivals would one day come to blows, so she feared for the hunter's life and thought about how she could best get rid of her first lover. So she confided in the hunter and asked him for his advice. He said, "Send the boy up to High Syl, beyond the Aachen, where the most beautiful Edelweiss grows. Ask for a bouquet of Edelweiss from his hand. Ask for it again and again. One day something will happen to him and will make him forget to come back." The treacherous girl gladly accepted the evil advice. A short time later, on a Saturday, the shepherd came to her and said, "Do you know anything new? Duke Friedrich of Bavaria is inviting the Berchtesgaden region. So I have come up to you to protect you, since you are all alone up here, managing and barracking." "Oh my God," replied the false woman. "What a dream you had. Just go back home, or better still, Go over to Göl and get me a fresh Edelweiss, the most beautiful flower, so that I can decorate my hat when I go down to church in Berchtesgaden tomorrow morning." "As you wish," answered the shepherd sadly. "I meant well," and left. He climbed the Göl and found Edelweiss in abundance, and no blossom seemed beautiful or large enough to him, so he climbed higher and higher until he finally discovered a blossom on the very edge of a rock that shone like pure silver and was large and beautiful like no other for miles around. It had to be hers. He reached it and picked it, but at the same moment the ground gave way beneath his feet and he fell with a terrible cry into the depths, meeting a terrible and miserable death. Meanwhile, the handsome hunter had arrived at the dairymaids. Both were in good spirits, but their joy was short-lived, for a group of rough soldiers who had made their way across the Mordau soon arrived. They didn't make much fuss with either of them, knocked the hunter down, and treated the dairymaid harshly enough to kill her. As she died, the ghost of her betrayed lover hovered before her eyes, making her last moments the most torturous of her entire life. The soldiers plundered the hunt, took everything that wasn't nailed down, slaughtered the cattle, and set fire to the dairyman's hut, leaving it to burn next to the bodies of the murdered. Since then, the alpine pasture has been called the Mordau. But every evening in the twilight, ghostly shadows hover over it, dim and heavy. These are the souls of the hunter and the faithless dairymaid. Cannot find peace.